Caesar abandoned his army. While his soldiers waited for payment, he was in Egypt with Cleopatra. So they did what no Roman army should ever do. They mutinied. Thousands of battle-hardened veterans, ready to turn on the man who made them. And when Caesar faced them, he didn't threaten them. He didn't fight them. He said one word, and they instantly backed down. The war had been long, not just long in years, but long in what it demanded from the men who fought it. These were not ordinary soldiers. They were veterans, hardened by campaigns, shaped by violence, and bound together by something stronger than discipline. They had marched across continents, fought in brutal conditions, and stood at the center of a conflict that would decide the future of Rome itself. Through it all, they followed one man. That man was Julius Caesar. For years, their loyalty had seemed unbreakable. Caesar led, and they followed. He took risks, and they won. Again and again, he proved himself, not just as a general, but as something more, someone worth believing in. But in Rome, loyalty was never just about belief. It was about reward. Roman soldiers didn't fight purely for honor or country. They fought with expectation. When the war ended, they expected payment, land, money, recognition. These weren't optional rewards. They were understood outcomes, promises, spoken or unspoken, that came with victory. And by the time the fighting began to settle, those expectations had grown heavy. Because while the soldiers waited, Caesar was somewhere else. After securing victory in the Civil War, instead of immediately returning to settle debts and reward his men, Caesar turned toward Egypt. There, he became deeply involved in a political struggle that was as dangerous as any battlefield. It was a land of wealth, instability, and opportunity, and at the center of it was Cleopatra. Cleopatra needed Caesar's support to secure her rule. Caesar saw the advantage: control, influence, and access to Egypt's immense wealth. What followed was not just a political alliance, but a relationship that would echo through history. But while Caesar was in Egypt, his army was waiting. And waiting, in this moment, did not feel like patience. It felt like abandonment. These were men who had already given years of their lives. They had fought for Caesar personally. They had risked everything for his victories. And now, instead of being rewarded, they watched from a distance as he remained abroad, wrapped in foreign politics, surrounded by luxury, and closely tied to a queen. The contrast was impossible to ignore. They were still in the dust, still uncertain, while their general was far away. Whether fair or not, perception began to take over. Even if Caesar had strategic reasons for staying in Egypt, even if his actions made sense politically, it didn't change how it felt to the men who had followed him through everything. To them, it began to seem like they had been left behind, used perhaps, forgotten even. And slowly, that feeling hardened into something dangerous. At first, it was quiet, conversations between soldiers, frustrations shared in low voices, questions without answers. When would they be paid? When would they be released? When would their sacrifices finally be acknowledged? But as time passed, the silence grew heavier, and uncertainty in an army without a war has a way of building pressure. Because when soldiers stop focusing outward, they start looking inward. Eventually, that pressure has to break, and it did. The soldiers didn't scatter or lose discipline. They did something far more serious. They organized. They gathered together, unified not by loyalty this time, but by demand. They wanted what they believed they were owed: payment, discharge, recognition, and most importantly, they believed they had the power to demand it. Because they weren't just any soldiers, they were Caesar's soldiers. The same men who had carried him to victory, the same men who had made his rise possible. Without them, there is no Caesar as Rome knew him. So from their perspective, this wasn't rebellion, it was leverage. They expected negotiation, resistance, maybe even compromise, but not what actually happened. When Caesar returned and heard of the mutiny, he didn't react the way most leaders would. He didn't gather loyal troops to suppress it. He didn't isolate the leaders or threaten punishment. He didn't respond with anger. Instead, he chose something far more precise. He went to them, alone. No overwhelming show of force, no visible protection, just one man walking into a crowd of soldiers who had openly defied him. It was dangerous, There's no way around that. But it was also calculated. Because in a moment like this, the first battle isn't physical, it's psychological. And by walking forward without fear, Caesar immediately disrupted the expectation of conflict. The soldiers were prepared for tension, for confrontation, for some kind of resistance. But calm is disarming. It forces people to question what they expect. He stood before them, looking at men who had once been completely loyal to him, men who had fought beside him, bled beside him, and helped him reshape the fate of Rome. And now, they stood against him, waiting, expecting something, a speech, a defense, an argument. Instead, Caesar gave them something far simpler. He spoke a single word, Quirites. It didn't sound powerful. There was no dramatic emphasis, no raised voice, but the meaning behind it carried enormous weight. Because Quirites meant citizens, not soldiers, not warriors, not his army, just civilians. And in that moment, Caesar didn't challenge their demands. He accepted them completely. They wanted discharge? Then they were discharged. They wanted to stop being soldiers? Then they were no longer soldiers. With one word, he removed the identity that gave them power. Because what Caesar understood, perfectly, was that their strength didn't just come from numbers or weapons. It came from who they believed they were. Roman soldiers weren't just men in armor. They were part of something larger. Their identity carried pride, purpose, and status. Being a soldier meant belonging to a force that shaped the world. And suddenly, that was gone. They stood in the same place, with the same weapons, among the same men, but they were no longer soldiers. They were just citizens, ordinary, replaceable. And that realization hit harder than any punishment ever could. Because in giving them exactly what they asked for, Caesar forced them to confront what they were actually losing. This had never been just about money. It was about identity, about meaning, about belonging to something powerful. And once that was stripped away, everything changed. The anger that had fueled the mutiny began to fade, not because they were threatened, but because they understood. They hadn't forced Caesar into a corner. They had removed themselves from the very thing that gave them value. And so, almost instantly, the dynamic shifted. The same men who had stood united in defiance began to unravel. They stepped forward, not with demands this time, but with requests. They asked to be taken back. They tried to reverse what they had set in motion. They offered loyalty again, service again, even at reduced reward, because now they saw clearly what they were about to lose. The mutiny collapsed without a fight. No punishments, no executions, no battle. Just a single word that redefined the entire situation so completely that resistance no longer made sense. And in that moment, Caesar didn't just regain control, he reinforced it. Because now his authority wasn't based on fear, it was based on understanding. He had shown that he could read his men better than they could read themselves, that he could dismantle a rebellion without raising his voice, that the real power he held wasn't just over their actions, but over how they saw themselves. This is what makes the moment so powerful. It isn't just a clever response, it's a demonstration of something deeper. That power is rarely about force alone. It's about perception. The soldiers believed they had leverage because they were united, experienced, and essential. But Caesar understood that their sense of importance depended entirely on their role within his system. Remove that role, and the leverage disappears. And once that happens, the rebellion has nothing left to stand on. Thousands of battle-hardened soldiers, ready to challenge one of the most powerful men in Rome, were stopped not by violence, but by a single word that forced them to see themselves differently. And once that changed, everything else followed. If you enjoy stories where history feels less like the past, and more like a series of calculated power moves, subscribe. Because moments like this didn't just shape history, they reveal how it was controlled.